What we started last time and talked a little more than usual, but it was an important case about how the Japanese have contained and managed violence. Any follow-up queries that people want to raise about student papers before we go into case studies sections of the course? Anyone else have a paper they'd like to run some ideas by us? Okay.
Okay.
But please do. Maybe introduce yourselves, maybe briefly, just with background and your interest in the topic area.
I'm Christina. I don't have too many questions, just more like I'm still on one side trying to get like more research sources, but I'm doing a paper comparing urban markets and local markets and where prisons end up fitting into those markets, and why there's like a phenomenon, there's like a thing where small towns really, when they either have like economic troubles like unemployment, or if they have certain bad reputations, they try to bring in a prison, which is kind of counterintuitive, just to kind of stimulate the local economy. And that versus there's a national decarceration movement that seems to take more popularity in like big cities like Chicago. And so I guess my
Sorry, what's the movement?
It's the smart decarceration movement. I think a professor.
Smart decarceration, which means what?
Generally, it moves towards trying to either lower the number of open prisons. Also, I think includes some level of reforms in terms of sentencing and the number of inmates, and also including rehabilitation in order to decrease numbers of people that are in prison, or how long their sentences are. And so my question, I just had...
People with coughs, we request you watch on YouTube. Active coughing, please leave, okay? Apologies, but we've had... Now, is it allergies? If it's only allergies, fine. But if it might be contagious, please...
It's allergies.
Okay, it's allergies. You're 100% sure? Okay, wonderful. Cough all you like. Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, so I guess just my question is, since this is an urban policy class, so a lot of our readings have focused around a lot of different cities, I was wondering if you had some recommendations for resources that focus a little bit more on rural towns, even comparative pieces even, that could be helpful.
Okay, well you got two or three big overlapping themes. One is sort of small towns versus other places. One is less fortunate economically, less developed places, and might they do, pursue different policies for which are bad for them more generally, or whatever. Third is crime, strictness of, harshness of sentencing, and how crime is handled more generally. And there are three literature. These are three disparate literatures in a sense. Just briefly on the third, we had several discussions of this, and we got two now active faculty in sociology. Robert Vargas has just joined the department, and he's got some very intriguing stuff which he's doing. And Forrest Stewart has worked on homeless and crime issues in LA, and now more generally in Chicago, especially with gangs. And then we've had people who come from other places, so job interviews, etc. So there's and Antoine Jones was a teaching assistant with me for a couple of sessions, and he's worked a lot on crime. So we had several sessions on it. That is one big issue which you all ought to know about, and so then we can be cautious about evaluation, but to try to get some simple factual questions. Has crime gone up or down in the last, say, 20, let's say, we can talk 50 years, and then maybe 10 to 20 years in the U.S.? What have the crime rates been let's say, over the last 40, 50 years, and then more or less up to present. Have any clue of that? Is just everybody ought to sort of know these basic facts.
In terms of like convicted crimes because of the war on drugs during like the late 70s and the 80s, you saw like a marked increase on people convicted of crimes, especially because there are a lot of different.
They're on the podium, the markers.
We use, supposed to use magic markers, I guess, not, okay, so, sorry, go ahead.
No, I know in Chicago itself.
So let's try to get an approximate line. What might it look like? Say maybe 1960s to today. What to say? Conviction. Let's say number of arrests, numbers of murders, number of, and then if you want to separate out drug related, we can do that. But let's. I mean, you folks have more specifics that you.
I feel like it's all just decreased.
No, but wait, but she's asking the question. If you have a pretty clear answer in your mind, or you've looked at this, fine. If you don't know, say you don't know and you'd like help from others.
Yeah, I know some. I don't remember exactly. Like maybe between 60s and 70s, it might have been kind of stagnant. I know in the 80s to like early 90s, it had created like a large increase. I think it's generally been on the decrease, although. In terms of like within certain demographics, like the number may have increased, or in certain cities, so like in Chicago, I know at least this summer when I came into school, I'm a third year, the homicide rate jumped up, I think to 14%, something around that.
In Chicago.
In Chicago, at least specifically.
Yeah, but it stands out because Chicago is such an exception.
Yeah.
Okay, you two others want to add something?
I mean, I think she was
Yeah,
spot
maybe
on.
ladies first.
Sorry.
Okay.
Well, I guess, I don't know. I don't really know since the 1960s. Since like the 90s, it's definitely
No,
decreased.
that's fine. So say 60s on is what we're asking.
I think it went up a little bit, probably, and then it went down. Like, went up a little bit after the 60s and then went down a little, went down
Okay.
today.
It's probably something like that, then, but if we get to individual cities, Chicago has gone way up. I mean, that may be too much, but New York and LA have gone down. Big competitors. Okay, so and we could try to put in drugs separately. I mean the simple drug issue is that the national government said courts and judges in cities are too lenient on drugs, and we want a national policy of forced standardized jail for anybody involved, especially with selling drugs. Okay, so that was, and I can't give you a date on that, but it was back here somewhere. So that led to an increase in drug prison sentencing, but the more general point. Sorry, so I think if we go back here, it was lower. So we've got these are approximate. So that's sorry. Do you have an addition to this?
Yeah, but what about like quality of life crimes just inflating the arrest rate?
Tell us what you mean
So
by.
like broken windows, like crime, like laws. So like jumping like the
Yeah,
turnstile.
most of these numbers are homicides. I mean, they're usually not broken windows. These are usually more serious crimes. Okay. Yeah.
Well, going along with that, I know that a lot of people in the African American community have been arrested for drugs, whereas like white people haven't. And I wonder how that might impact the research at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I mean, we're getting to a second sort. So we've got arrests. We've got sentencing. Then we've got the concept of surveillance. Then we can add differential, how this affects different neighborhoods. But something which has become much more visible in the last 10 or so years in research and in the policies, especially related to Bratton. Who knows about one guy who really made a difference in this? Who's Bratton? Yes.
He was the NYPD commissioner under Giuliani and de Blasio.
Okay. So Bratton was the police chief in Boston. James Q. Wilson, political scientist from Chicago, developed the so-called broken windows theory, which said that crime will be worse if you have broken windows in a neighborhood, loitering, broken glass, and the image of disrepair will encourage more crime. And so, stop the broken windows, stop the loitering, and be strict on small things which may look like they're not important, but they change the feel. Okay, so Bratton heard about this. Wilson was then his professor at Harvard. He implemented it in Boston. The crime rate went way down in Boston. Bratton got a national reputation. He was hired by New York. He stayed in New York, and the crime went down dramatically. The New York style of Bratton as the cop and the mayor were be tough on criminals, and including distinctly, of course, young black men who were more frequently, in New York the term was stop and frisk. That is, there was a big increase in stopping people who were loitering near subway station entrances or begging or panhandling at stop signs and so forth. And those people got stopped, or more frequently stopped, frisked, and then checked for their background. Okay, this led to the second important piece of this. So just to finish with Bratton. So Bratton went to L.A., did the same basic thing in L.A. Forrest Stewart did a great study of a neighborhood he was studying before Bratton arrived, and there were hundreds of people in 4 or 5 blocks. It's the main homeless area of L.A., and there were lots of prostitutes, drug people just loitering, people drinking, people talking, and so forth. Bratton arrived. The police arrived. The police would come to this neighborhood maybe 6 times a day, and they would stop every single person and ask them for their identification. What are you doing here? And after 2 or 3 days, the crowds disappeared, because many of the people, and so Forrest did maybe 4 or 5 years of detailed field work in this one neighborhood. He had a clear sense of a lot. He also rode around with the cops. He talked to the cops. Got a feel of how it was working. And so what came out of this is the idea, not just of crime and arrests and going to jail, but the sense of surveillance, stopping and frisking, the fear of people to be stopped or interrogated by the police, because many of them might have a small offense on a police record from 5 or 10, for something relatively minor, or they may be drug dealers who have been convicted in the past, in which case if they have a 3rd offense, they may have a serious jail sentence imposed. So the general point, and so we have some numbers which are, and we have with some national numbers, some national data, as well as these case studies. We put these together, and there is a big increase. So this is the Bratton era, if you will, the being more tough, and so if we get quickly to evaluations, people say clearly there's a conflict between being tougher and human rights, personal sensitivity, trying to restore people who have deviated at a young age. They've been around kids in school. They've had bad models, etc. I mean, so clearly that this has been here for hundreds of years of how to whether to be tougher or not, and how to do it. So without trying to get and we can explore that if you want. I mean, there are clear religious differences, there are regional differences, there are international differences, etc. Conceptions of individual responsibility and so forth, which Max Weber and others have written about. But my quick point was, we have whether you say it's good or bad, the Bratton type policies were followed initially in those 3 cities, let's say those 2 cities, New York and LA, not Chicago. And crime measured by arrests, sentencing, a series of things dramatically decreased, like dropping by half in roughly a 10-year period. Okay, Bratton took credit for it. The mayors of New York and LA said this is working, this is successful. The critics said you were racist, you're classist, you're being too tough on minorities, etc. And there were certainly elements of truth in all of this. But I mean, what I want to point out as background, whether you say it's good or bad, or we should do more or less, or how it should be changed, there's a dramatic drop in the number that the jails are empty. I wouldn't say empty. The jails are back here when people said, you know, all the drug dealers should go to jail. The jails then got overwhelmed, and so people started building more and more jails. In small towns, in Chicago, in different neighborhoods, etc., and they were filled. Then they were. So how to deal with not enough jails gets to your small town question. We're now in the opposite situation. That is, especially the big city jails, no longer are so full because of these kinds of policies nationally. However, not in Chicago. In the last 2 years or so in Chicago, there's been a dramatic increase in crime. And why that has happened, nobody really knows. That is, I've heard presentations by the top experts in Chicago, the police, the criminal people, criminologists, sociologists, so forth. And we can list 15 factors that might be going on. But to try to analyze and to control which of those 15, how do they fit together, how much, and why is Chicago so different from New York and LA, we just don't know. So, yeah.
And I guess for Chicago in particular, like, has this increase has been like the last 10 years?
No,
just the last
about 2 years.
Just about 2 years.
Yeah, crime was going down in Chicago until the last, maybe 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've had a number of students very interested in this. There've been a couple of South Side students who've had family connections with gangs, and the big stories. I mean, well, the obvious thing, especially for our Chinese, that is many international visitors here, especially people from Asia, say, oh, crime. Are you going to the U.S.? You're going to Chicago. You know, you're going to die. All right, so. Your mother probably calls you up, you're still alive, and so forth. All right. So I have lived, let me add, I've lived in Bronzeville, and if you look on the map of Chicago historical crimes and murders and deaths for the last 100 years, I live at the center of crime. I go biking at night all over Chicago in all the neighborhoods. I mean, I look at the data and I say, hey, here are the high crime places. I've been biking there for 10 years. Let me go down with my video, so I take my video. And I stand there for 45 minutes, midnight, 10 p.m., 3 a.m., and I take a video, see what's going on in this. Is this, you know, what's so different about this street? And often they don't look very different. But what I then have noticed is how often are the police cars coming by? So the police release these data. And that's after one. Okay, one more little story, and this is right on something that we wanted to talk about. The normal story of crime in Chicago is that the high crime areas are West Side and South Side. Okay, how do you interpret that? It's a political question. So people will say it's black. People will say it's poor. People will say it's dangerous. People will say it's single-family mothers with sons who don't respect their parents and don't go to church. I mean, you can name 15 things, but what this ignores is the unit. And the last time we talked, not Monday, but last Wednesday, we talked about how big is the unit, and are we talking nationally like all of China, or regions in China, or smaller units? And this whole story changes if we stop using these neighborhood, that is these community areas they're called in Chicago, and instead go to points. So if instead you look at points and you say, where is crime? Then the story becomes, there's an elevated railroad. And these show very, very high crimes at the stops of the L. And this was the highest. This was King Drive and
It's 63rd. It's on 63rd where the King Drive stop is.
Okay, 63rd. That's yeah. Okay. So that's where I spent an hour. You know, I went there multiple times with my camera. That was the highest place on the south side. Okay, so this was 10 years earlier, then 10 years later. So 10 years earlier, this was bright red stuff. I mean, very high crimes. After 10 years, many of these disappeared. What happened during those 10 years?
In the last 10 years.
During the 10 years where those L stops became safer.
They become renovated with cameras? Or like overhauled?
Well, probably a little bit of that, but most of all, the police knew this, so the police went there, and they began patrolling those immediate areas, and crime went way down. Here it went down, but it was still very high. Okay, point one. Point two, I live over here in Bronzeville. What's the crime rate? Say this is King Drive. Actually, I live right on King Drive. What's the crime rate on King Drive in Bronzeville compared to the Loop, or Lincoln Park, Wicker Park, rest of Chicago, or let's say Cambridge, Berkeley, Westwood area of LA? About the same. That is, I live in Bronzeville, and in my immediate neighborhood, the point is there are big differences if you go 1 or 2 blocks. And so different blocks have very different experiences. I won't say broken windows is too simple, but they're different scenes. So the scene idea came in part from my biking all around the city, for years. I've done this for decades. And you get a sense of how people act and treat one another differently in different scenes. But that the scene is smaller, the scene is not the whole west side. That is, if you say the west side and the south side, the story that conveys is race and poverty. Race and poverty are the causes of crime. What's the story here? This whole area is 100% black, or 99.9% black. So it's not race, it's not poverty. It's the L stops. It's the specifics which can be, where policy interventions can make a dramatic difference and have done so with cameras, with police patrols, with people, with lighting, brighter lighting, and so forth. So you've only been here, most of you only been here briefly, but this campus was about 1/4 as bright as it is now 5 or 10 years ago. It was dark. Crossing the Midway was dark, and people were scared to cross the Midway. Now, it's like Times Square. We got lights everywhere. And I haven't seen specific crime data, but I bet that the crimes, at least the concern of crossing the Midway, walking around in Hyde Park, have dropped substantially. Richard Taub did a famous book on fear of crime and actual crime rates in Chicago and Chicago neighborhoods. And the dramatic finding was, if you compare Hyde Park to the Loop, to a bunch of other, Hyde Park was off the charts. Everybody, oh my God, Hyde Park is terribly dangerous. Fear of crime is over the top here. You look at the actual crime rates, and they're about the same, as I said, as New Haven,
Lincoln Park.
Berkeley, Lincoln Park, Cambridge, and so forth. So each of these, so you get very different stories depending how you look at the data, and all of these are valid. So I'd say everything you said is good. They're all good topics. You can pursue any one of them, but do them enough that you get a sense how the simple race, class, gender causes everything
Yeah.
And Vargas talks about like gerrymandering in his book with like the east side of Little Village and stuff.
What Vargas does, which is a brilliant innovation, is to bring in the political and civic activities into the two halves of Little Village. It's the one of the most important Mexican-American neighborhoods in Chicago. And because it's the same basic neighborhood, it shares ethnicity, it shares income, shares education, it shares the general social characteristics. But dramatically different stories in terms of crime rates, and these in turn are embedded in one strong, tough alderman who has civic activities working together in low crime, and the other is fragmented among different aldermen, and no one really pays attention. The civic groups don't get funded. They don't intervene with the police to try to help the gangs cut back, and the gangs are going wild, and the gangs are actively killing off each other, and they're very heavily involved with international drug stuff. So two very different stories in the same neighborhood, and so these are. And so I mean, if you've read some of Vargas's work, you know that Vargas does what I'm telling. What Vargas does is what we're doing here. Go beyond the simple stereotypes, which is to say, oh yes, if people are poor and black, they're going to be dangerous. Not true. But if we look at, especially in this course, if we try to look at policies that make a difference, and so, I mean, Sophie, you mentioned a couple of things in Bronzeville. Is there anything you want to add to this, say housing or any other specific policies in Chicago or elsewhere that go into this?
Is it that you're interested in drug crimes specifically?
I was curious about like how the economies of like an urban area versus like a rural area kind of influence their desire for jails, and then to like try to bring in either new jobs or some new industry, and then how that sort of results. So like.
Okay, but I mean, here's a good general point. How strong is the relationship between rural income and support for more stringent crime policies? If we look at the relationship between those two measures, that is, okay, is the question clear?
Yeah. I like with particularly like John Eason's book is like partly like kind of the inspiration. He did like Big House on the Prairie.
Okay, I mean, I haven't read the book, but what kind of evidence does he offer that would answer my question?
He went to Forest City in Arkansas because they're a city that economically suffering and, you know, wanted to bring in a jail. And one thing that was really interesting about it was it even went beyond even typical like political or demographic interests. Like you had the white supremacists or loud like racists in the town that. Okay, what just a second. I mean, clearly lots is going on in one town, but let's try to answer this. Does he address my simple question? How strong is the relationship? That is, if people live in a small town and they're poor, how much that is, and if you take, I mean, if the people are more, or if you have everybody in all towns in the U.S., from big to small, and they vary in income, and they vary in education, and they vary in city size, how much is income and small city size going to predict stringency of crime? Well, I know that in this town, like at least in the prison, the prisoners don't even necessarily come from the area. Like a lot of them do come from more urban cities. You're not answering the question. So the part of it is that does crime even really matter in these cities when you're looking at whether they want a prison?
Were you asking about?
No, but you're avoiding my basic question. I want to get a clear answer to my simple, clear question.
Are you asking about not whether or not the economy of the town is going to bring a prison in, but more like, does the demographic of the town like directly influence the crime in the town? Is that what you're asking about?
No. Let me ask it again. If you ask people, are you in favor of being more stringent, less stringent, or about the same in how we treat criminals? You ask that nationally or internationally. That's a stringency attitude. Okay, if we have that as a dependent variable, what causes some people to be more stringent and others to be less stringent? And how strongly can we predict that from knowing the income or the education, or the race of the individual, or the gender of the individual. You heard me say this before in this class? Something like this? What's the answer from what you've heard me say at least 3 times about other things? How strongly are these related?
At least in the book he says
No,
that.
no, no, no. What have I said here? That is, I mean, from what you've said in the book, he doesn't have a research design that permits him to answer my questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is, you need a different research, but I mean, the simple answer is, try to remember, how much does because you get in many of your readings, in the national media, and in other courses, how much do race, class, gender, and national origin, like being Polish or Jewish or Irish or whatever, how much do these 4 classic social variables explain most attitudes and behavior, such as going to church, shopping, fear of crime, support of stringency in crime? And the answer is, anybody remember now which I've given you before? About 15%. That is, these 4 things explain about 15% of the variation in what people feel. What's the corollary of that? 85% is not explained by income or race or education or national origin or gender. Which is to say, there are many women who are, that is, women who may be a little more worried about crime, but to know that someone is a woman, to know that someone is black or white, to know that someone is a college graduate or not, to know that someone is Polish or Jewish, only lets you explain about 15% of the variation in being more stringent. So in that sense, they're small towns that are poor, that have low or high educated folks, and some of them will say we want to be tougher on crime. Others will say we don't want to be tough on crime, and many will be about the same as big towns and not very different.
Does saying you're tough on crime equate to wanting a prison?
No, that's
Okay.
I mean that is what would this suggest? Do you want a prison? Do you support a prison?
Well,
And the answer is probably less than 15%. Or let's say it might be as high as 15%.
well, at least in the point that he makes in the book, he I think agrees in that like those factors don't determine necessarily people's views, but as a because it has both double and it'll have the NAACP members and the leaders in the community will join along with white supremacists in supporting the bringing of a prison. It seems like a very there's not much having to do even with beliefs or politics. It really comes from this, I guess, need to survive economically.
No, but it comes from you're saying, and what you're saying may well be 100% correct. I haven't read the book, but if it says the NAACP supports it, and so that implies many citizens and many civic groups in the town want the prison. That's the general point.
Yeah, even though a lot of them...
Okay, but if you did a survey of all the citizens in the town, are you likely to find that 100% of the citizens want the prison?
Yeah.
Even if you have, say, 100 civic groups and 95 of the civic groups say we want it. What happened in Proposition 13 in California? With the governor, Jerry Brown, all the civic groups, the Democratic and Republican Party, they all said, don't vote for Prop 13. And what did the citizens do? 2/3 of them said, cut taxes by half. The hell with you civic groups, the hell with you parties. So the citizens are not the same as the leaders, and they're not the same as the civic groups. So it's not as if any of this is right or wrong, but you as analysts should be conscious of each of these as different sources of information. And if you're advising a city council member or the NAACP in that town or whatever, clearly it's good to be conscious of these. That's all. And to point these things out and to not say everybody wants this. And certainly, that is, I'd say one major thing that I've learned from not only living, but also serving on boards and advisory consultants and so forth of civic groups, and the aldermen, series of aldermen in the ward where I live, is there's great diversity among the citizens in different subgroups and neighborhoods within Bronxville. And you have, for instance, some older women active in churches who say we should abolish all liquor sales and consumption in the neighborhood. And there's parts of South Shore have done this. As we have dry neighborhoods in Chicago, no liquor may be sold. There are other people who say, you know, we ought to be able to do anything. I mean, that's fascist. I mean, so you've got great diversity. And so when you get up to the aldermanic or the civic groups level, they're a little more consistent. But be cautious about attributing too much of a consistent view is all that I'm suggesting. Or especially to say, I mean, that there's an economic self-interest. I mean, we have the same discussion in Bronxville. Should we have a casino? And some of the people in the finance department in City of Chicago say, you know, yeah, if you have a casino in Bronxville, that'll generate a lot of revenue for the taxes for the aldermen and for the City of Chicago. And the City of Chicago is in bad financial shape. The state of Illinois is a disaster. Right now, the schools are on the verge of being closed, etc. And so, casino would be great. What do the citizens all say when we have meetings on this? No casino! We don't want the gangsters. We don't want drug people coming into this neighborhood. It will transform the whole image of the neighborhood. No, no, no. So, in that sense, there are people pulling and tugging always, and the world is gray. That's my simple story. But to try to understand where and why and how the different groups may shift is what we're trying to point out. Okay. Backing up. I mean, I would say if you simply pull some of these kinds of things together in a paper, focusing, if you want, on the general point you're making is that some smaller towns have done this, and they may have had support from the NAACP and perhaps a majority of African Americans. Is in that sense, it contradicts the New York Times image that, you know, being tough is only a white elite and that blacks are against being tough. No, I mean, they're probably more. You have to look at the data, and it depends on how you ask the question. But there are many African Americans who are tougher on crime and who want to be and are in their own lives tougher on criminals and crime than are especially whites in Hyde Park, for instance. Okay. I mean, so I'd say digging into any one of those general points that you made, thinking about them yourself, looking at the kinds of evidence which we've just put up here, and there's a lot more. And reading critically the book, I mean, reading, you know, making the points that he does, but also thinking about yourself, what do other things say about it, all of those are great to do for a paper. Any specific follow-up of?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. You had your hand up.
Yeah, my question is,
Tell us your name.
my name is Rachel.
Okay.
I'm going to do a BA proposal because I think my question doesn't
Great.
enough like research.
Great.
And it's similar in some ways. I'm interested in what pushes people to give and where they choose. What pushes people to give, and more specifically where people choose to give their money.
Okay.
So I've kind of made an assumption that people give either in terms of local giving, to either local political campaigns or to local nonprofits. And I'm also kind of considering religious institutions and where those might fit in. But I'm wondering what pushes...
So when you say assumption, you're assuming that they don't give to religious institutions?
No.
That is, I'm teasing you a little bit and making a point for others, because many people will say, I assume. Is it necessary to say, as you did there, I assume? Can't you say, I may choose to focus on
That's fair.
civic and political groups, and I may not, but okay, so fine.
And so I'm kind of questioning where people choose to put their money and how that's impacted by like who they are as people. So I'm from Tampa. And I picked to focus on Tampa because it's neither red nor blue. And so I think I'll be able to talk to people on, you know, who are both Republican and Democrat, but also who are represented by people who are both Republican and Democrat, and be able to make some assumptions about the state of the national government and how that affects where people give their money and also their own political background, and kind of question how that impacts city ordinance and like how cities move by who gets the money.
What data can you use?
I'm going to interview people from Tampa,
How many can you interview?
as many as I would like to.
Are there surveys of citizens in Tampa or nationally or any other where that you, or elsewhere that you've looked at or might look
Not that I know of, no.
at? Have you looked?
No, but I figured that that's like a very niche subject that, you know, not many people are like interested in researching in Tampa, so I figured. And I don't have to do Tampa, I just know people there, and I know that it's, you know, if I interview people in Chicago, it would be very, first of all, it's run by Democrats, and second of all, most people here are Democrats. So I think that I was trying to go like kind of quote unquote neutral by finding a city that is both, you know, not necessarily one way leaning.
But just for everyone, if you're trying to see how strong is the relationship between, let's add another variable here. How strongly does the party, the political party, explain, say, cash contributions? And how much do each of these other things explain cash contributions? And you're interested in this either in the U.S. or internationally. Is the best way to answer that question to interview 5 or 50 or 500, and you probably can't interview 500 people. So it's more likely to be less than 100 in one city. And how are you going to sample? I mean, will they be, is it a representative sample? Or what if people don't answer? I mean, they don't answer. If you stop in downtown, you interview who's over there, then they're not representative of people who are at home and so forth. So that is, the point I'm making is, think about your analytical questions. Then ask yourself, what research design should I use that will help me answer the questions that I'm interested in? And if the question as you framed it is, how much does political party affiliation, and therefore you're saying, I don't want to study Chicago, I want to study Tampa because political party, well, okay. That is, how much does the fact that Chicago is more Democrat or Tampa is more mixed shift this, or friends or whatever? That is, the bottom line here is likely to be about the same, 15%. Or put differently, interviewing a handful of people may be good for you to get a feel for how they talk about it personally, but it probably is not going to convince a lot of critical social scientists that this is new original evidence when these things have been studied in hundreds of surveys, hundreds of times in the last 50 plus years. This is mainstream political science literature. Stanford University, for instance, if you want to take a look, there's a research center at Stanford University that's got data on cash, on who contributes to what kinds of civic organizations and political organizations, including political parties as a National Democratic Party, local candidates, mayors, governors, U.S. congressmen, U.S. senators. They've got not only, and they publicly list the name of each person who wrote the check. That's now publicly required to be disclosed. So you can look up you can look up and see, George Soros is a multimillionaire. He was the largest contributor to Obama. You can look up the name of maybe there's a limit such as $100 or something like that. Maybe it doesn't go below $100. But you've got all of the medium-sized, middle, and big contributors in the whole U.S. to all of these places. And you could, for instance, you could do that, and you can look at this for one little neighborhood within Tampa, and then another neighborhood in Tampa, and then look at it for Chicago if you want.
Okay.
And so in that sense, you might find that illuminating. That is, if you go to Tampa or Chicago and you say, could you tell me how many checks you wrote to which political candidates, do you think people are going to tell you?
I don't know.
They might, but we don't know if they would exaggerate a little bit. Whereas if they've got to report this to the IRS and or that is not just they, but that the people who got the checks are required to report who gave you the money, and they'll go to jail if they don't do it properly, you're more likely to have the actual numbers of checks, the actual right amount, than if you just stop people in front of the Art Institute, say on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, say, have you written any checks to political leaders recently? Not that I want to talk to you about. Okay, so you know, there are many good topics you can write about, but if I hear you say something as you just did, I'm avoiding Chicago because it's more democratic. Do you think if you look at the data for people, say, like Donald Trump, and how many people in Chicago wrote checks for Donald Trump, you think you might find a few?
Yeah.
Okay. Whatever the party of the mayor is in Chicago, whatever the state of Illinois is about, individuals can still write checks.
Yeah, I was just looking more at local politics, which I think might be a little different than national politics, but I'm not sure.
Sure, no, of course it'd be different. But all I'm saying is just being conscious of these and seeing how these rules of the game shift. And seeing that, and being conscious of the fact that these kinds of different data are available will lead you away from the kind of simple black people are poor and they cause more crimes. That's the kind of thing I'm trying to get you away from as a proud Bronzeville resident. Okay? And that, I mean, that one, when I've shown that one map, or these two maps, first of the neighborhoods, because this is the old Chicago tradition, you know, making ecological maps and saying, oh, this is how cities work. And Chicago sociologists have done this for 100 years or something, yeah, almost 100 years. and you then get this map, which comes right from the Chicago Police Department, because we've got big data. See, this is now thousands, hundreds of thousands of crimes. We didn't have this, and it would have been too hard to get this without lots of stuff being, you know, all these little points. So more data leads you to recognize you need better theory and a sharper theory to say, how do I want to analyze the data, and what's the specific question that I want to try to answer? Okay. Anything you want to follow up? That is what I rather than trying to say, you know, how about this, why don't you write a paper? Why not think about these issues and think about how you might reformulate what you're, and then we can email, we can talk about it again in class or whatever. Okay, anybody else have a paper idea they want to discuss a little bit? Yes?
Actually, I just had a quick question. In the paper, let's say if we were going to do, so let's say if I ended up maybe focusing more on like the idea of the factors that could influence crime besides like race and all and income and stuff like that, would I be able to include like maps or things that I've created?
Sure.
And isolated?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. No, I'd say, you've heard me sort of say, I'm eclectic in terms of, I try to use all kinds of data, consider all kinds of theories, and then join them together to see what's compelling, what works. And then deliberate, and we have done this, and I've worked with people for decades, where we have conferences. So we have people, I've coordinated this project called Fiscal Austerity and Urban Innovation. We have over 10,000 cities, we have hundreds of people, we meet many times a year.